My name's Ann Cornell, and I'm the director of our employer-based services. So for those of you that aren't familiar with me and my role, that means I oversee both our employee assistance program and behavioral health partners. And this has put our teams in a pretty unique position over the past couple of weeks to really be on the front line of providing emotional support for our employees throughout the university. So I'm going to ask you guys to listen to some of the feedback that we've gotten from our clients to a question that we often ask everyone else. How does this make us feel? Right? So what we're hearing from our clients, both again at EAP and BHP throughout the hospital and in a variety of settings, is a lot of anxiety, right? Which we expect to see. So people are anxious. They're anxious about the risk that this poses to themselves, to their family members, and how to keep their families safe. For people that are on the front lines, they're having a lot of anxious thoughts about how to go home and keep their family safe and come back to work. And for those employees that we've sent home to stay healthy, they're having a lot of anxiety about how to manage their time, what to do when they get back to work, and how to stay healthy in an emotional way so that they can take over for their colleagues who might fall ill. People are also feeling really overwhelmed, as you can imagine and probably can identify with. Trying to manage all of our typical work and home responsibilities is a lot on a good week. On top of that, many people have taken on responsibility for their kids, for academic work, for challenging technology along with kids or with working from home, or even just the amount of information and emails and updates that we're getting can be really overwhelming. Another thing that we're hearing a lot of, and again, it's not surprising, but it's something that I think, as a department, we do have some responsibility for, particularly in leadership around the hospital, is to do what we can to communicate clearly, even though the information coming from everywhere isn't always that clear, because this causes a lot of anger and resentment. And this is what we're hearing from people on the front lines, that they feel as though communication hasn't been consistent or clear. And we've also heard, and I'm not saying that this is correct, but our clients are thinking that they've been told that they might get fired if they don't comply with recommendations. So again, a lot of anger and resentment that might be going around. It makes it difficult for everyone to do what they need to do. Another term we're hearing a lot about is moral distress. So this is when we're asked to do something um, that's against our ethical morals, what we think we should do, but we're asking to comply with a policy or a procedure. And then grief. We're hearing about grief already, even though we're in the initial phases of this crisis. Without conventional rituals that we typically have to cope, people are grieving and trying to find new ways to grieve and to stay connected. This can be anything from grief, the loss of a loved one, when you can't attend a funeral that you would normally go to. We're hearing grief from people that can't do birthday parties that they would typically attend to, or to celebrate as a team the way that they used to. Or our seniors, right, who are missing out on their last year and many really important developmental milestones. So I think that the grief that we're already experiencing early on is going to be confounded over the weeks and months. And then pretty much anything else or any other emotion you guys can think of, which I'm sure this group can think of a lot, right? So we're confused, people are afraid, lonely, and sad. And I also think that it's really important to highlight some of the really positive feelings that are out there too and that are being experienced. Pride, hope, a sense of connectivity to others, even when we're physically separated, a lot of love, a lot of caring, and a lot of dedication. So it's important to highlight the positive, and that's something that I'm going to focus on moving forward as well. So knowing is not the same as doing. On a good day, I think this team and this group in particular has a pretty good idea about what we can do to manage our emotions and take care of ourselves. So why is it so hard, right? There's a lot of reasons, right? We are pushed and we push ourselves to be superhuman, to rise to the occasion and to go full speed ahead. And perhaps, given what we're all facing and the amount of time that we know we're going to be tackling this issue, we really need to adjust our thinking and to think about running a marathon and not a sprint. And that's what we're hearing from a lot of clients that we're interacting with, that we all started off at a sprint and we needed to, but now we're going to need to pace ourselves. It's hard to put ourselves first, and it's hard for us to realize that we're not superhuman or potentially not even functioning at our typical level when we're asking ourselves to do some pretty high-level tasks and we might not be able to do them. I know many of us in this department have heard Dr. Privatera talk for a long time about cognitive load theory, or the used amount of working memory resources that we have. And if you consider just the number of emails and policy changes that we've had in the past few weeks, it's no wonder our brains are tired. Right? And then on top of that, even if you yourself are not prone to anxiety, there's a lot of free-falling anxiety around in the world, in our country, and our city, in the hospital, so that even if you're doing regular tasks, we're on overdrive and we're not necessarily able to perform to the best of our abilities. On top of that, we tend to be a crew that's pretty dedicated to taking care of others, right? So we're pushing ourselves forward, and we also might be prone to have a lot of should statements. Not only about what we should be doing for others, but what we should be able to handle ourselves. And that, in fact, can become one of the biggest barriers that we have to taking care of ourselves. So I've chosen two different exercises that I'm going to go over briefly with you today. This is a group, we are all knowledgeable, we know what skills we're supposed to be using, but I don't think that we always practice what we preach. So the first one that I'm going to challenge you guys to consider is 3 good things, okay? So many of you are familiar by now with Martin Seligman's work in the practice of 3 good things. If you've heard of this and you're not doing it, I would ask you why not. And then if you haven't heard of it, give me a minute and I'll explain it. So the practice of 3 good things is based on the fact that we are hardwired as humans to remember the negative things that happen day to day, and it's actually harder for us to remember the good things. There's a lot of cognitive science behind this, and there's also a way that we can short circuit it and we can get around it. Building resilience is possible, even in the midst of a difficult situation. So we can do this by focusing on positive emotions. So here's the recommendation. So just before you go to sleep, you're going to ask yourself, what went well today and what was my role in making that happen? Right. So the act of focusing on the positive and bringing that into your attention can have a really positive effect on your sleep and on your mood. Some of the research that we have from the Michigan Health and Duke University is that doing this for 14 consecutive days can be as effective as a low dose of Prozac. And I say this carefully as to not imply that this falls into our should statements of pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps and just thinking differently, but by saying that there's some pretty good evidence that there's some simple things that most of us should be able to fit into our day, is to think about 3 good things and what you did to contribute to them happening. So 3 good things and what you did to contribute to them happening. The other intervention that I want to bring everyone's attention to, and you're probably familiar with it because we all live in the same world here in psychiatry, is acceptance and commitment therapy, so ACT. This is an evidence-based intervention. It uses acceptance and mindfulness strategies, and it's a lovely antidote to all the anxiety that we're experiencing these days. So rather than trying to control your thoughts and feelings, sensations and memories, it teaches you to just notice them and accept them, even if it's unwanted or unpleasant, and it connects us with our values. So one of the things that has come out through ACT is the acronym of FACE COVID. And I can send this around later in case the slides still aren't working, so you can all have it. But for FACE, it's focusing on what's in your control, acknowledging your thoughts and feelings, coming back to your own body, to your own internal experience, and engaging what you're doing, engaging in what you're doing physically. Right? So this is just an application of the ACT skills that most of us are familiar with. The COVID acronym is committed to action, right? Committed to actions that are in keeping with your values. Opening up to yourself and to others, connecting with your values, identifying resources, and of course, as we're all familiar with at this point, disinfect and keep your distance. So this sounds very basic, and it is, and I think we all need to go back to the basics, particularly when we notice that we're struggling in any way. People need to eat, they need to sleep, and they need to drink. I'm hearing this from around the hospital, even in our own department, for people that are in inpatient, that they don't feel comfortable drinking water or eating, and they're going 12-hour shifts without any nutrition. So finding creative ways to be able to eat and stay safe. We need to stay active. I can't tell you how many clients I spoke to this week that aren't active, and if I asked them gently, what are the basic fundamental rules about owning a dog? They would say, well, you have to walk them every day. And I said, yes, you need to walk yourself. We give this to our animals, but not to ourselves. We need to maintain social connections. We need to set boundaries, boundaries for work, boundaries in home, and this is particularly difficult for those of us that are working at home. We need healthy routines, and we need to unplug from work and technology and the news on a regular basis. And you need to develop your self-care toolkit. So even taking a few minutes while I'm talking, if it was the 3 good things exercise or the ACT acronym, whatever it is that sounds appealing, I would encourage you to just give it a try, or to go back to some other skills that you have, such as breathing, and actively implement them on a daily basis, because unless we take care of ourselves, we can't take care of the other people in our lives. And having worked in this department for a long time, I know what a dedicated group this is, and how much we all care about everybody else. So please take care of yourself first. We had a lecture that we gave years ago that said you have to put your own mask on first. And I think that's particularly true in this setting. Okay, thank you. I'll make sure the slides get out since it doesn't seem like they advanced. And I will turn it over to Sephora.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sephora Rosenberg, and among the various hats that I wear in the department at the medical center, I'm also the discipline chief for marriage and family therapy and the director of the family therapy services. And so Ben had asked if I would be able to share a little bit about family coping as an augmentation to individual and personal coping in a time of great distress. And if there's one thing that I've really come to appreciate, not only for us individually, but also as families, is that this is a time of really unprecedented overturning of pretty much everything. So my hope is in this presentation of a few slides, not to share with you things that look one way like they do on television, and then you get them and bring them home and you're like, wait, this doesn't really work at all, but things that hopefully will be practical tips and maybe even reminders about how to tend to our families in a time such as the one that we're seeing now. So the first has to do with normalcy and routine. Given the multiple levels of disruption that we have, the fact of me saying routine is critical may seem both obvious and actually really difficult to achieve. But there are things that when we look inside of our own homes or our own families that can restore a sense of normalcy. I can probably pluck any number of examples from conversations I've had with my daughter about things that are normal and routine and an expected part of health and wellness, like it doesn't matter if you're not going to see your friends today, you need to brush your teeth. Now, while I'm sure that folks who are tuning in do make a regular habit of brushing and flossing, there may be some of us who are sort of adrift from the normalcy and routine of health and wellness, even when it comes to the things that Anne was describing, like regular activity, eating on a regular schedule, or as regular as there was before, having regular sleep. And in fact, this sort of normalcy and routine can offer some respite. There is some relief in sort of the regular motion of a day, especially when you have animals and children, or children who act like animals, to be able to create and maintain a routine. Give some consideration in your homes to which things can still be normal. So for example, if your family regularly has a movie night where you sit in front of the television and eat dinner, I mean, for some of you that may be every night anymore, but for others of you that's sort of a special once a week routine. Consider how to maintain those, even though life outside of the walls of your home or when you go back into the hospital really feels quite abnormal. The last point on here is to consider an uptick in behavioral issues as a sign of sort of the impact of disruption. So lots of us are accustomed to noticing the impact of disruption on cats and dogs, demonstrate behaviors behaving in a family setting. So just consider that when you see an uptick in that, whether it's in yours or in your partner, or even yourself, and perhaps a routine to normalcy can help. This particular slide, I'm not telling you what it says on the left. I'm going to let you try to figure it out. Really invites us to focus a little bit on grace and permission. When I've given similar ideas through other talks, sometimes I say things like strive for 95, but I've decided that I don't really like the feel of that. What I really want all of us to be able to do, especially as it relates to our home lives, is to have some flexibility and grace for ourselves around the kind of parents or partners or friends or siblings or sons and daughters we have been accustomed to being, as well as being the workers that we've been accustomed to being. And knowing that this is a time where drawing on all of our resources may leave us feeling like we're coming up short. So this is especially true, I think, when it comes to family. I, for one, have a fourth grader at home, and there's a reason why I didn't pick to go into primary education, and I'm very in touch with all of those reasons now. So recognizing that doing our best under challenging circumstances to be more things to more people than we would have been on a regular day, it's just a good opportunity to be reminded of how the best is sort of all we can do, and perhaps from day to day or week to week that can look different. But this is an invitation for us to give permission to do our best, to stumble sometimes, to be bumpy in the way that we try to solve problems, and to promote the same in other people. For adults, for kids, really for everybody around us, it's quite humanizing to be able to do that. And it's a recognition that things are not normal and not typical. And even as we do our best to try to create that, it may not be as it was before or as it might be in the future. This particular slide, if you start with the quote on the left, I don't know who shared this quote, and all the attempts I made to try to find the reference all said unknown, which makes it sound quite mysterious and powerful. The first thing you should know about me is that I'm not you, and a lot more will make sense after that. This is really to demonstrate that in a family context or in a household, even before the arrival of the novel coronavirus and the impact on all of us, we all have pretty different styles of doing and thinking and being and relating and coping, frankly, particularly in a time of uncertainty. So if you were to think about any two adults in your home, one may be apt to stay glued to the television or the news or the computer to try to get as much information as possible. And you may notice that another adult in the same home may be apt to say, that's enough, I don't want to listen to that. So those differences in the way that we interact or the way that we manage information or feelings of crisis or feelings of unsteadiness were really there before. That's true about most of our families. And in a time when there's so much more stress, those differences in coping styles may leave us looking at the other person saying, what is wrong with you? How could you possibly do or think or be that way? Can't you see things from my perspective? And really, the truth of the matter is, each of us may be right in our own ways. For one, because we don't entirely know what all the right answers are. And for two, it's actually the multitude of perspectives and ways of looking at things that in a good day promotes resilience. And when those of us who are into teams talk about difference of perspective and difference of discipline, bringing sort of more to the whole than any individual in itself, that collective resilience really is promoted by saying, we don't have to see things the same way. I'm touching my face, sorry. We don't have to see things the same way, but it's really an opportunity to look at those differences, not as liabilities or threats, so much as we see them perhaps as opportunities for us bringing our best in different ways. So the aim that I'm going to recommend for our families is to have some grace around ourselves and the other in the face of the kind of difference that we had before and that we'll probably continue to have, that really fosters the best in what we bring. Those perspectives and their variety and the range of them are not the enemy. This next slide, I have in the course of my clinical work talked a lot with couples about this, but it's really true of every family member and being in our homes. Health in a relationship, from my perspective, is really predicated on the balance of separateness and togetherness. So some of you may be thinking to yourselves by week 3 or 4 of all of this, if I really loved my family, if I really loved my partner, my spouse, if I really loved my parent, wouldn't I just want to spend every waking moment with them? And the answer is no, because normal life does not really require that for most of us. We have latitude to come and go. Normal life gives us the opportunity to come into the office or go in for a shift and come home and have a renewed sense of interest and curiosity about what we missed when we weren't there. And the truth of the matter is that sort of a forced togetherness during a time of a stay-at-home order or quarantine really creates challenges to those of us who really are needing that sort of balance of separateness and togetherness. I read an article that talked about that separateness and togetherness really being an organic complement, like an inhale and an exhale. And what's challenging about this time for lots of us is that we need both, but really have probably too much of one and not enough of the other. So my recommendation to you and your families is to do your best to take space when you need it. And even better would be to anticipate when you might need it and then take it before the moment you really need it, and allow others in your home to do the same thing. When we sort of push past those limits and we don't recognize that they're coming, we sort of find ourselves, and sometimes have reflected back by others, that we're being irritable, that we're doing things that are snide or edgy or sharp, and it creates more conflict perhaps. So the recommendation is to consider planning when your separate time may be and where that space may be able to be, and similarly planning together time too. So for folks who are working at home, who may say every time is together time, create space in your office or in your home or outside or on a walk where you have time to hear yourself think or to listen to a book. And then when you come back, to have that be together time, but to be quite intentional about how you want to delineate those spaces. Similarly, at a time of crisis, lots of us sort of forget the importance of boundaries, which many of us are accustomed to thinking are also a sign of health and wellness outside of a time of crisis. So the recommendations in this slide have to do with making sure that we know we're entitled to have boundaries as it relates to our families and our work, but also really that it allows us to function our best in each of those realms. So for those folks who are working at home, like with the toothbrushing for your kid or for yourself, delineate an agenda and create some routine. Be sure to take breaks and connect with other people, and acknowledge that there may be distractions, but to do our best to create space and time, both physically and temporally, that allow us to delineate a workspace. And if you're working at work, the recommendation in the first bullet point is really about trying to create a little bit of cognitive space or geographic space or temporal space between the workplace and the home space, so that you have an opportunity to sort of debrief in your own mind or with a trusted other. Take a walk before you go home, take a long drive on your way home, to be able to allow yourself to breathe out some of the day before you walk through the door. As you're able, set your end time to your workday so that it doesn't drag on into perpetuity. For folks who are working on inpatient shifts or CPAP shifts, this may also not seem as easy, but to be able to have a clear delineation between work and home, maintain those boundaries. Lots of us who do psychotherapy or counseling talk about the importance of communication, and really now is a time, perhaps more than ever, where we really need that. Talking and communicating, however you do that, is a vehicle for connection. It's certainly an antidote for the kind of isolation and loneliness that we all risk, not only for ourselves, but also for our family who may be in our homes or maybe at a distance. It allows us a vehicle to be able to process real and serious things, but also silly things or light things. So anybody with school-age children probably has lots of bodily function talk in their home. For anybody who's got tips on how to stop that immediately, please back channel me and email me. I'd really appreciate it. But leaving room to talk and connect, again, reconnects us with a sense of normalcy, but also creates a way for us to be able to share our thoughts and feelings and to be able to problem solve together as opposed to alone. What I have at the bottom are some recommendations for how to structure some of that talking. So for example, having a morning huddle, not unlike might happen in an inpatient unit when you're looking at the day, or an outpatient ambulatory clinic, looking at sort of what's ahead for the day, what's going to be unexpected, what are the routine things, is there anything that we need, and to do that with everybody in your family so that everyone has sort of a map of what to expect for the day. Consider using regular spaces if you have a family dinner or you have a family bedtime routine. Just talk about the day to check in. I had a colleague from the department also talk about how they use bedtime as a way to do a family version of Three Good Things. And so I think it's a great opportunity to be thinking about connecting through language and communication. Be direct in the way that you talk about real things, but also use age-appropriate transparency. There are a lot of really great resources that have been floating around, and we're happy to recirculate about how to talk about isolation or quarantine or social distancing or even the novel coronavirus with small kids. But I find that even adults actually can benefit from a lot of that sort of simple language and appropriate transparency, which is not designed to incite fear and panic, but is designed to say there's lots we don't know, and here's what we do know, and here's how we'll manage it as a family. The last bullet point is to know your audience and to set reasonable expectations. And that's true not only for kids, but it's true for adults too. So if you and your partner have a way that you're accustomed to communicating about serious things, this may not be the time for that person to suddenly hatch a skill set that you always wish they had, but really never had. And I'm just saying not to hope, not to not hope rather, but to set expectations in a reasonable way, and perhaps to have some grace around what is still in process or being developed when it comes to the way that we communicate with each other. And I think this is my last slide. I personally am a big fan of humor. I think there's a lot of back and forth about whether humor is really appropriate in light of a time of crisis. In a family like mine, both my family of origin and the family that I've built here, there really is no other way. And so my sister, in fact, sent me the image on the right. It was a good reminder that lots of us are needing to be in touch with humor. There's actually some good data as it relates to the neurobiology of laughter. And there's a certain intimacy that can be created by telling a joke. So for those of you who've ever stood next to me in a lunch line at the medical center, I'm infamous for sort of muttering things under my breath that I'm half sure nobody's really hearing, but on occasion I'll look up and see who around me might have heard it, and I'll look for a smile in somebody else. That creates an intimacy and a connection, which may be hard for us to be in touch with over Zoom or FaceTime. But don't underestimate the power on our biology when it comes to laughter and connection. Humor really lightens the load for all of us, not just for kids, but for adults too. And oftentimes kids are a really great reminder of how we can't really get through a day without silly things. Just a word to those of you or those of us who may edge on sarcasm, perhaps sometimes, in thinking it's really funny. This is really a time where humor can probably be more lighthearted and less mean or edgy. And so sarcasm has that gift and curse of being a little bit of both, but this might be a time where we just want to be aiming for levity and goodness and trying to sort of check ourselves a little bit before we go right for sarcasm.